Harlem, November 12, 1947, 7 p.m. The winter wind from the Hudson River blew into Harlem, bringing with it a biting chill and the damp smell of coal. The streets were lit, but the yellowish glow of the streetlights was not enough to dispel the darkness that reigned in the narrow alleyways. 15-year-old Ben Thomas, pulled up the collar of his worn woolen coat, a coat he had inherited from his father, who had died in World War II. Ben hurried down Lenox Avenue. In his pocket, his hand clutched a handful of loose change, $4.35. That was his week's wages delivering newspapers and shining shoes at Mr. Jones's barbershop. Ben smiled, his breath turning into a puff of white smoke. Today was his mother's birthday. That $4 would be enough to buy a blue scarf at Macy's, his mother's favorite color. He'd been gazing at it for a month through the window.
"Hey, kid."
A slurred voice came from the shadows of the alley between the bakery and the pawn shop. Ben froze. His heart pounded. He knew the Harlem rule: don't stop, don't look, just go straight. He ducked, speeding up. But three dark figures lunged out, blocking his path. They weren't Harlemers. They were three white men wearing leather jackets reeking of cheap liquor and aggression. They were outsiders, perhaps dock workers from Hell's Kitchen or vagrants from the Bronx who had come to Harlem seeking morbid pleasure.
"Where are you going in such a hurry, kid?"
The biggest one, with a long scar on his cheek, grabbed Ben by the collar and lifted him up. I'm just going home." Ben stammered, instinctively clutching his pocket.
"Going home?"
Another man chuckled, pulling out a gleaming switchblade.
"What's in your pocket? I heard coins jingling."
"Nothing. Please." Ben pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes. It was his mother's birthday present. He couldn't lose it.
"Give it here,"
the man with the knife yelled, pressing the blade against Ben's neck. Ben struggled. In a moment of bravery yet foolishness typical of a 15-year-old, he tried to push the big man away and run.
"You little brat!"
The big man roared, punching Ben hard in the stomach. The boy doubled over in pain. Immediately, three men lunged at him. Kicks and punches rained down on his small frame. They snatched the money from his pocket. $4.35 scattered across the filthy snow.
"You dare resist!"
The knife-wielding man, bloodthirsty and delirious from alcohol, refused to stop. He swung the knife.
Thump!
One stab, then two stabs. Ben collapsed, blood gushing out, staining the coins lying on the snow. His breath faded, the image of his blue scarf blurred in his vision, and then vanished. Then the three murderers looked at the motionless body, spat, picked up the money, and left, leaving a 15-year-old boy frozen to death in a cold Harlem alley. 9:00 p.m., the Red Rooster Club. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual table in the corner of the VIP room. On the table was a half-finished chess game and a glass of cognac. Opposite him was Nat Pettigrew, his trusted right-hand man. The atmosphere in the cafe was cheerful, filled with the soothing sounds of jazz music, when the door burst open violently. A black man rushed in. It was Joe, Black Panther, one of Bumpy's scouts. Joe's face was deathly pale.
"Boss, something big has happened,"
Joe gasped, running to Bumpy's table. Bumpy didn't look up, his hand still holding the bishop. "Calm down, Joe. There's no room for panic here. What's wrong? The police raided."
"No. Worse."
Joe swallowed. "They just found Ben's body. Ben Thomas." Bumpy's hand holding the chess piece froze in midair. Ben Thomas, the shoe-shine boy at Mr. Jones's shop. The boy Bumpy greeted every morning as he passed by. "Good morning, boss." The boy whom Bumpy had given $5 last week for books and supplies, but who refused because he wanted to earn his own money through hard work. Bumpy slowly placed a chess piece down. His eyes darkened, colder than the winter outside. "Where?" Bumpy asked, his voice low and menacing. 135th Alley. "The police are there." Bumpy stood up, putting on his black woolen coat. "Nat, follow me." "The crime scene, 9:30 p.m. The police spotlights flickered, illuminating the crumbling brick wall. A crowd of Harlem residents stood around, the wailing of women echoing mournfully. Sarah, Ben's mother, knelt beside the body, covered with a flimsy white sheet. She screamed her son's name, her hands clawing at the cold pavement. The sight was so heartbreaking that even the toughest men would turn away. Two white police officers, Sergeant Miller and Officer O'Hara, stood smoking and taking notes. They looked more bored than concerned. To them, it was just another black corpse in Harlem. A statistic, nothing more. The crowd parted automatically as Bumpy Johnson approached. His imposing presence silenced the entire space. Bumpy walked over to Sarah. He knelt down, placing his hand on the grieving mother's shoulder. "Sarah," Bumpy whispered. Sarah looked up, her eyes swollen. She clutched Bumpy's shirt. "Mr. Johnson, they killed him. Ben was such a good boy. He was just going to buy me a present." Bumpy looked down at Ben's hand protruding from the cloth. A hand calloused from shoe shining, still clutching a blood-stained 25-cent coin. The only coin the robbers had left behind. Bumpy gently removed the coin, holding it tightly in his palm. Ben's blood seeped into his skin. He stood up and walked toward the two officers. "Sergeant Miller," Bumpy called. Miller turned, blowing smoke in Bumpy's face. "Ah, Bumpy. Looking at the crime scene, go home. This is police business." "What have you found?" Bumpy asked, his voice restrained. "Nothing." Miller shrugged, closing his notebook. "Just a petty robbery. Probably some drug addicts in the neighborhood. No witnesses, no evidence. We'll file a report, but don't expect too much. People die every day in this area." "A petty robbery." Bumpy repeated, his gaze fixed on Miller, sending a shiver down the officer's spine. "It was a 15-year-old. He was stabbed 12 times. It wasn't a robbery. It was a massacre." "Listen, Bumpy," O'Hara interjected, his hand on his gun holster. "Don't tell us how to do our job. If you know anything, tell us. Otherwise, get out of here." Bumpy looked at the two officers. He saw the indifference in their eyes. He knew this case file would be thrown into a drawer and gather dust by tomorrow morning. Justice would never come from these badges. "All right," Bumpy said, adjusting his collar. "You guys do your work. Get the files done." Bumpy turned and walked away. Nat Pettigrew followed closely beside him. "Boss," Nat whispered. "Call all the captains," Bumpy said, his voice as cold as a razor blade. "Close all the casinos, all the bars. Harlem won't sleep tonight. I want to know every single rat that ventured into this area tonight." Bumpy held out his hand, looking at Ben's blood-stained coin. 2 days, Nat Bay," Bumpy said. "The police have 2 days to forget this case, but we have 2 days to find them. And when I find them, even God can't save them." Bumpy's office, 11 o'clock p.m. The room was filled with cigarette smoke. 10 men leaders of various Harlem districts under Bumpy's command stood bowed, awaiting orders. No one dared breathe. They had never seen the Godfather so angry. His anger wasn't loud, but a terrifying silence before the storm. Bumpy stood by the window, looking down at the Harlem streets. "Ben Thomas," Bumpy began, his voice echoing through the room. "He's not a gangster. He doesn't deal drugs. He doesn't carry a gun. He's the future of this place. He's the purity we've lost." Bumpy turned, tossing a blood-stained coin onto the mahogany table. A dry, sharp sound echoed. 3 white men. That's what the witness heard. Maybe dock workers or Italians or Irishmen. I don't care where they're from. I care where they are. "Boss," one of the henchmen, Big Mike, spoke up. "If they're white, our hunt could start a war with other gangs. Lucky Luciano or the Irish in Hell's Kitchen won't stand idly by." Bumpy stepped closer to Big Mike. His eyes blazed with fury. "War?" Bumpy sneered. "This isn't a war, Mike. A war is when 2 sides have guns. This is a hunt. I don't care what Luciano thinks. I don't care what the sheriff thinks. Tonight, the law in Harlem is me." He gave decisive orders. "Joe, have your men search all the bus and train stations. See if there are any groups of 3 men acting suspiciously with blood-stained clothes. Nat, contact the prostitutes. They saw everything. Pay them double, triple. I want a name or an identifying characteristic. Mike, you take your men down to the southern border. Stop any vehicles that seem suspicious. Check every trunk. And remember this," Bumpy emphasized, pointing his finger at each person. "When you find them, don't kill them. I repeat, don't kill them. Bring them back here. I want them alive. I want them breathing so they understand the price of killing a child in Harlem." "Understood, sir," 10 voices responded in unison. Bumpy Johnson's shadow army fanned out into every corner of the city. The New York police officers went home to sleep, believing the case was closed. But they didn't know that the real investigation had only just begun. An investigation without a warrant, without the right to remain silent, and certainly without leniency. 3 a.m., a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of Harlem. A frantic knocking echoed. The landlady, an elderly woman of color, trembled as she opened the door. Nat Pettigrew stood there, accompanied by 2 burly henchmen. "Mrs. Jones," Nat said politely but firmly. Do you have any new guests tonight? Yes. Yes, Mr. Nat, Mrs. Jones stammered. 3 white men. They rented room number 4. They said they were drunk and needed a place to sleep, but I saw red stains on their clothes. I was too scared to ask. Nat smiled, placing a wad of money in the old woman's hand. Well done. Now go back to your room, lock the door, and turn up the radio. You won't want to hear what's about to happen. Nat gestured to his henchmen. They drew their guns and daggers and crept up the creaky wooden staircase. In room 4, the 3 murderers slept soundly, snoring like thunder beside them. Empty liquor bottles and the $4.35 stolen money scattered haphazardly on the table. They thought they were out. They thought that in this slum human life was cheap and no one cared about a black boy. They had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had angered Bumpy Johnson. Bang! The door was kicked open. Before they could open their eyes, butts of rifles rained down on their heads. The sound of bones breaking muffled screams. Nat grabbed the biggest man by the hair, the one who had punched Ben first, and dragged him to his feet. Welcome to Harlem, Nat whispered in his ear. My boss is waiting for you. They were smothered in sacks dragged down the stairs and thrown into the trunk of a black Cadillac. The car sped through the night, heading toward an abandoned warehouse on the banks of the Harlem River, known as Bumpy Johnson's interrogation room. The clock struck 4 a.m. Only 7 hours had passed since Ben's death. The police were still fast asleep, but the death sentence had already been drafted. And tomorrow, when the sun rose, the entire New York City Police Department would be stunned by what they found. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't just want revenge. He wanted to send a message written in blood. An abandoned warehouse on the banks of the Harlem River. 4:30 a.m., November 13th, 1947. The smell of the Hudson River. The smell of mud, the smell of engine oil, and the smell of dead fish suffered the 3 men as they were dragged out of the trunk of a car. They were thrown onto the cold concrete floor, their hands and feet bound tightly with barbed wire. The only light in the vast warehouse came from a single incandescent light bulb hanging from the ceiling, swaying slightly, casting ghostly shadows on the walls. The scarred man, the ringleader of the robbery, crawled to his feet, spitting out a mouthful of blood. The drunkenness had vanished, replaced by primal fear. He looked around. More than a dozen large, dark-skinned men dressed in black coats and fedoras stood surrounding him in the shadows. They were silent as statues, only their eyes blazing with hatred. "Who are you?" he yelled, trying to sound tough. "Do you know who I am? I'm Mickey Spillane's cousin from Hell's Kitchen. If a single hair on my head is harmed, this whole slum will burn to ashes." No one answered him. From the shadows in the distance, footsteps echoed. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, regularly. The sound of leather shoes tapping on the concrete floor was like a judge's gavel striking a table. Bumpy Johnson stepped into the light. He didn't take off his coat, his leather gloves still tightly fastened. His face was calm, showing no sign of anger, but that calmness was more terrifying than a lion's roar. Bumpy pulled up an old wooden chair and placed it in front of the 3 prisoners. He sat down, crossed his legs, and lit a cigarette. "Mickey Spillane." Bumpy exhaled smoke, his deep, warm voice echoing. "A respectable name, but Mickey knows the law. He knows there are boundaries that should never be crossed." "Who are you?" the scarred man asked, his voice trembling. "I'm the garbage collector in this city," Bumpy replied. He gestured to Nat. Nat Pettigrew stepped forward, throwing onto the floor the items he'd taken from their pockets, a switchblade still stained with dried blood and loose change. A total of $4.35. The 3 men saw the knife, their faces turning pale. "Ah," Bumpy nodded, picking up the knife. He pressed a button. The blade snapped out with a sharp click. "The evidence, and here's the incriminating evidence." He pointed to the scattered change. "Because of this pile of scrap metal," Bumpy said, his voice suddenly turning cold. "You took the life of a child who had never harmed anyone, a child who was out buying presents for his mother." That was just an accident." The second man, the skinny one who had been holding the knife earlier, began to cry. "We just wanted to scare him. He struggled. I did it by accident." Accidentally. Bumpy stood up and walked closer to him. 12 stabs. 12 times you accidentally stabbed a 15-year-old in the chest. Bien. Bumpy swung his hand. The slap with his leather glove was so strong that the skinny man fell backward, breaking 2 of his front teeth. He spat blood and groaned. "I don't like to lie," Bumpy said, wiping his glove with a handkerchief. "There are no lawyers here, no jury. Just me. And I want to hear the truth. Why did you kill him?" The scarred man, knowing there was no turning back, suddenly let out a bitter laugh. He looked at Bumpy with the contempt of a deeply ingrained racist, and "The truth." He spat at Bumpy's feet. "The truth is he was just a ragged black bastard, a little monkey. I killed him because I liked it, because I hated the way he looked at me. So what? What are you going to do, kill me? The police will find you. You're just a filthy mob boss." The warehouse fell silent. Nat Pettigrew was about to lunge forward and shoot him in the head, but Bumpy held out his hand to stop him. Bumpy looked at the scarred man. He wasn't angry. He felt pity. "You're right about one thing," Bumpy said softly. "I'm the mob boss. I have a dirty hand, but I have principles. And you guys, you're animals." Bumpy turned to Nat. "Nat, what's Ben's worth?" "Priceless, boss," Nat replied. "But he had $4.35 in his pocket." $4.35, Bumpy muttered. "That's the price you put on his life. Well, I'll get exactly that price back from you." Bumpy took off his jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves. He picked up the switchblade, the weapon that had killed Ben. "I won't kill you guys right now," Bumpy said, approaching the scarred man. "I'll make you feel every pain Ben suffered, 12 stab wounds, divided equally among the 3 of you, and then I'll send you to where you belong." A blood-curdling scream ripped through the tranquil night on the banks of the Harlem River. But the gentle lapping of the waves and the distant sound of a train whistle swallowed it all. In that warehouse, justice was served in its most primal form. Blood for blood. 28th Precinct Police Department, Harlem, 8:00 a.m., November 13th. Sergeant Miller walked into the station with a cup of coffee in his hand, yawning repeatedly. He tossed his hat onto his desk and looked at the backlog of files. "Anything new, O'Hara?" Miller asked his colleague on duty. "Same old story." O'Hara shrugged, his eyes glued to the sports newspaper. "A few bar fights, a bicycle theft. Oh, and Sarah Thomas was here again this morning. She was crying and demanding we catch the killer of her son." "Again?" Miller frowned. "I told her there were no leads. These black people are so annoying, as if her son were the president. I sent her away." O'Hara chuckled. "Told her she was a detective actively investigating. Ha ha!" The 2 officers chuckled. They didn't care. To them, Harlem was New York's garbage dump, and their job was simply to make sure that garbage dump didn't overflow into the wealthy neighborhood. "Ring! Ring!" The phone on the duty officer's desk rang. O'Hara picked it up. 28th Precinct Police Department. "What?" O'Hara's face turned pale. He jumped up, knocking over his glass of water. "Where?" "Okay, we'll be right there. Don't let anyone get near." O'Hara hung up his hands, trembling. "What's going on?" Miller asked, sensing something was wrong. "Someone just called," O'Hara stammered. They found 3 white men." "Where are they dead?" "They were tied up, right in front of Mr. Jones's barbershop, where Ben works." O'Hara swallowed hard. "And the caller said their condition was terrible." Lenox Avenue, 8:30 a.m. Police sirens blared. Hundreds of Harlem residents poured into the streets. They stood in a large circle in front of the barbershop. The atmosphere wasn't the usual chaotic noise, but a solemn and terrifying silence. As Miller and O'Hara's car approached, the crowd parted, but the fear of the police was gone from their eyes. Instead, there was a silent defiance and triumph. Miller stepped out of the car and was stunned by the sight before him. He had been a policeman for 20 years, seen many dead bodies, but never had he seen anything so symbolic and horrifying. 3 white men, the men who had killed Ben, were tied up kneeling in a row. They were still alive, but barely breathing. Their clothes were tattered and soaked with blood. Each man had shallow but painful gashes on his chest, a rough count of exactly 4 on each. 12 gashes in total, corresponding to the number of stab wounds on Ben. But what chilled Miller the most was what they wore around their necks. Each man wore a cardboard sign written in neat but childish handwriting similar to Ben's. "First man, I stole $4 from a child. Second man, I killed an angel. Third man, the leader. I am a murderer. Judge me." and at their feet, neatly stacked on the sidewalk, lay exactly $4.35 in loose change. Not a penny missing. Beside the pile of money was the murder weapon, its fingerprints wiped away, leaving only the blood of the victim and the killer. Miller trembled as he approached. The scarred man looked up at Miller with swollen eyes. He wasn't pleading for help. He looked at the officer with a desperate plea to be arrested. "Please," he whispered through broken teeth. "Arrest me. Put me in jail. Don't let him come back. He's a devil." Miller looked around. He looked up at the rooftops, the windows. He knew who had done this. All of Harlem knew who had done this. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. No witnesses needed. No evidence needed. This was the Godfather's signature. He didn't kill them and hide the bodies. He did the police job, find the culprit, gather the evidence, and hand it over. But he did it in a way that brought shame and humiliation to the police. He proved that when the law sleeps, Bumpy Johnson will wake up. A reporter from the New York Amsterdam News quickly snapped a picture. The flash went off. This picture would be on the front page tomorrow, shaking the entire city. "Call an ambulance," Miller said, his voice hoarse. He felt the badge on his chest suddenly become heavy and meaningless. "And call the major crimes unit down here. This is beyond our control." 10 o'clock a.m. Abyssinian Baptist Church. While the entire police department was in chaos over the 3 culprits who had been returned, Bumpy Johnson sat quietly in the back pews of the church. He wore a smart black suit, a Bible in his hand. Above, the pastor was leading a prayer service for Ben's soul. Sarah sat in the front row sobbing, but her face had lost some of its despair. She knew justice had been served. Bumpy didn't pray. He looked up at the statue of Jesus crucified. He wondered if God would forgive what he had done the night before in the barn. "You've done a great job, Ellsworth," a deep, warm voice said beside him. Bumpy turned around. Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., the powerful black pastor and congressman of Harlem, was standing there. "I was just taking a walk, Pastor," Bumpy replied softly. "The sheriff just called me." Powell sat down next to Bumpy. "He's furious. He says you're turning Harlem into an autonomous zone. He says your actions are an insult to the justice system." Bumpy gave a weak smile. "The justice system? Where was it when Ben was killed? Where was it when Sarah was crying for help?" "I know, Bumpy, I know." Powell sighed. "But you're playing with fire. By handing them over alive like that, you're openly challenging the authority of the state. They won't let it go. They'll hunt you down." Bumpy stood up, adjusting his vest. "Let them come," Bumpy said, his gaze resolute. "I'd rather be hunted for doing the right thing than be left alone to watch my children be slaughtered like animals." Bumpy walked out of the church, the winter sun casting a lonely shadow over his figure. He had won this game. He had brought justice to Ben. But he knew this had ignited a new war. The New York Police Department wouldn't accept defeat. They would launch a full-scale assault on Harlem to reclaim their honor. And Bumpy Johnson was ready. New York City Sheriff's Office, Manhattan, 2 p.m., November 13th. The New York Amsterdam News sat prominently on Sheriff Francis Gallagher's polished oak desk. The large, bold headline slapped him in the face. "Harlem Justice. When police are powerless, the boss speaks." Below was a black and white photograph of 3 white men kneeling wearing confession signs with a neatly stacked $4.35 bill. Gallagher's face, flushed, veins bulging in his neck. He slammed his fist down on the table, sending his glass of water flying. "A disgrace!" Gallagher roared. "A national disgrace. What are we running here? A police department or a circus to let a black criminal teach us how to arrest people?" Standing before him was Captain O'Malley, the man in charge of the entire North Manhattan area. O'Malley bowed his head, sweat beading on his forehead. "Sir, we have no evidence linking Bumpy Johnson to this. No one dares to testify. The other 3 are in the hospital. They're too scared to say who kidnapped them." "I don't need evidence," Gallagher roared, pointing to the north-facing window. "I need a message. I want Harlem to understand that the law belongs to the gold badge, not to some black guy in a suit. Tonight, I want you to wipe Harlem out, smash his hideout, arrest all his henchmen, find anything drugs, guns, gambling records. If you can't find it, then create it." "Everywhere?" O'Malley asked. "Everywhere," Gallagher growled. "Make tonight hell for Bumpy Johnson." Harlem, 10 p.m. The atmosphere in Harlem was thick with tension. Residents sensitive to the smell of danger had already locked their doors. The streets were deserted, only the wind whistling through broken windows could be heard. At Mr. Jones's barbershop, where a shocking scene had unfolded this morning, Bumpy Johnson sat in an old leather chair. Mr. Jones was shaving Bumpy's beard with a sharp razor. The only sound in the room was the razor swishing against the white foam. "You shouldn't be here, Bumpy," Mr. Jones said softly, his hand steady as he shaved. "The informant says the cops are massing on 110th Street. A lot of them. Trucks, rifles, police dogs. They're about to overrun this place." Bumpy closed his eyes, enjoying the feeling of the warm towel on his face. "If I run away, Mr. Jones," Bumpy said slowly, "they'll turn Harlem upside down looking for me. They'll smash your shop, burn Sarah's house, beat up the other kids. I'm here to make sure their anger is directed at just one person." "But they'll set you up," Mr. Jones worried. "I know." Bumpy sat up, wiping away the soap suds. His face was smooth, sharp, and authoritative. "Where's Nat?" "He's done your orders. Disbanded the men. Moved all the books and hot goods out of the area. The Red Rooster is closed tonight." "Good." Bumpy adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. "Then open the door and make a pot of tea. The guests are coming." 23:30, Operation Sledgehammer. The siren's wail ripped through the quiet night. Not one or two cars, but an entire army. 20 police cars, along with 3 riot control vans, roared across the 110th Street boundary. Their flashing red and blue lights cast a chaotic and deadly glow over the brown brick buildings of Harlem. Captain O'Malley led the way. He stepped out of a car baton and hand pistol at his hip. Following him were 50 heavily armed police officers, their faces grim. They weren't there to arrest. They were there to destroy. "Split into 3 teams," O'Malley yelled into the loudspeaker. "Team 1 search the Red Rooster. Team 2 check the dock warehouses. Team 3 follow me to the barbershop. Break down any doors that don't open. Arrest anyone in your way." Crash, crash. The glass doors of the Red Rooster Club were shattered. Police stormed in like robbers. They smashed tables and chairs with batons, smashed expensive bottles of liquor, and tore down paintings. They searched for drugs and lottery books, but in reality, they were venting their anger. On another street corner, a group of young black men smoking were brutally beaten by police, handcuffed, and dragged into a police van without reason. Screams and curses echoed everywhere. Harlem groaned under the heel of state power. Mr. Jones's barbershop, 11:45 p.m. Bumpy Johnson sat reading a book of Langston Hughes's poetry, a steaming cup of hot tea on the table. Mr. Jones stood in the corner, his hand gripping a broom. The screech of screeching tires echoed right outside the door. Blinding headlights shone through the glass. Crash. The shop door was kicked open. Captain O'Malley entered, followed by 6 officers with rifles at the ready. Bumpy didn't flinch. He calmly closed his book, set it down on the table, and looked up at O'Hara. "Hello, Captain," Bumpy said, his voice calm as if greeting an old friend. "You're here for a haircut." "It's a bit late, but Mr. Jones is still very skilled." O'Malley's face turned purple. He stepped forward and knocked Bumpy's teacup to the ground. Crash hot tea splattered all over Bumpy's shiny leather shoes. "Get up, you dog!" O'Malley roared. Search everything! Take down every chair! Pry up every brick!" The police officers swarmed in, tearing apart the seat cushions, flipping through drawers, and smashing bottles of shampoo and hair dye. Mr. Jones tried to intervene when he saw them smashing the family heirloom mirror, but Bumpy gestured with his eyes, "Stay still." O'Malley pressed his face close to Bumpy's, the smell of alcohol and cigarettes assaulting the mob boss's nostrils. "You think you're so smart, Bumpy. You think you can play the hero here? You've disgraced the police department." "I thought I'd helped you," Bumpy replied, his eyes unwavering. "I handed over the murderer. You should be thanking me and giving me a civic medal." "Shut up." O'Malley drew his pistol and pressed it against Bumpy's temple. "I know you've hidden drugs here, or a gun, or gambling records. If I find even a small packet of powder, I'll send you to Sing Sing for life." "Go ahead and search." Bumpy spread his hands. "I'm a law-abiding citizen, Captain." 15 minutes passed. The barbershop had turned into a battlefield, but the officers returned, shaking their heads at O'Malley. "Nothing, sir. Clean. No drugs, no guns, no dirty money." O'Malley gritted his teeth. He knew Bumpy had gotten ahead. He glared at Bumpy with a crazed look. If there was no evidence, he would create it. O'Malley reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small packet of white powder. He intended to slip it into Bumpy's vest pocket. But Bumpy was faster. He gripped O'Malley's wrist, a grip as strong as steel pincers.
Don't do that, Captain,
Bumpy whispered, just loud enough for the two of them to hear.
Look out the window.
O'Malley jumped and looked outside. Beyond the shattered glass under the streetlights and police spotlights, hundreds of Harlem residents had gathered. They stood silently in the darkness. Men, women, the elderly children. And in the front row was Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Jr. Beside him were two photojournalists from the New York Times and the Herald Tribune, the largest white-speaking newspapers. They were raising their cameras, ready to capture any action. "You can frame me," Bumpy continued to whisper. "But if you do that in front of the press and the MPS tomorrow, it won't just be me in jail. Your career and Chief Gallagher's will be over. A photo of a white police captain planting drugs on a black man will be a juicy piece of news for the upcoming election." O'Malley broke out in a cold sweat. He had been too aggressive, forgetting that Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was a politician of the underworld. O'Malley pulled his hand back, putting away the packet of powder. He knew he had lost this round. He couldn't arrest Bumpy for possession of counterfeit drugs in front of the press. But he couldn't leave empty-handed. His superiors had ordered him to capture Bumpy. "Very well," O'Malley sneered, sheathing his gun. "You're very clever, but I don't need drugs to arrest you. Last night, 3 white citizens were brutally assaulted, kidnapped, and tortured. I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to commit kidnapping and intentional infliction of injury." "Do you have an arrest warrant?" Bumpy asked. "I don't need one. This is an emergency." O'Malley gestured to the officers. "Handcuff him." 2 officers rushed forward, twisted Bumpy's arms behind his back, and cold handcuffs tightened around his wrists. "Let's go." O'Malley pushed Bumpy forcefully out the door. As Bumpy walked out of the barbershop, the flashing lights of cameras went off incessantly. The Harlem crowd stirred. Several young men tried to rush forward to rescue him, but Bumpy shook his head. He held his head high, walking confidently between the rows of officers. He didn't look like a criminal being arrested. He looked like a general marching among his defeated enemies. Reverend Powell shouted, "We'll bail you out, Bumpy. Justice is on our side." O'Malley shoved Bumpy into the back of the police van. He turned to the crowd, raising his baton menacingly. "Disperse. Go home immediately, or you'll all be arrested." The convoy of police cars sped away, leaving behind a desolate but furious Harlem. The Tombs, Manhattan Detention Center, 100 a.m., November 14th. Bumpy was thrown into a cold, damp, solitary confinement cell. No bed, no blanket, just a bucket and 4 stone walls. This is where the police break the will of the most hardened criminals. The iron door slammed shut. Darkness fell. But Bumpy was not afraid. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. He thought of Ben. He thought of the $4.35 coin. He knew the street fight had temporarily subsided, but the battle in the courtroom and in the newspapers was about to begin. The police had power, but they had underestimated the power of public outrage. And more importantly, Bumpy wasn't alone. At a luxurious mansion on the Upper East Side, Frank Costello's phone, the Prime Minister of the Italian Mafia, rang. "Frank." The voice of Bumpy's personal lawyer came through the line. "They've arrested Bumpy. He needs a favor." Costello, who always respected Bumpy's intelligence and also had clandestine dealings with Harlem, puffed on his cigar. "Tell Bumpy to sleep soundly," Costello said. "Tomorrow morning, the judge will receive a call. The New York police have just stirred up a hornet's nest." In the darkness of his cell, Bumpy Johnson smiled. The 48-hour sentence wasn't over yet. Interrogation room. The Tombs prison. 8 o'clock a.m., November 14th. Captain O'Malley entered the room, slamming the file down on the cold metal desk. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep and the pressure from his superiors. He looked at Bumpy Johnson sitting opposite him, his hands cuffed to the chair, yet his demeanor as composed as if he were in his own office. "You're finished, Bumpy," O'Malley hissed. "The district attorney just called. They're going to charge you with kidnapping, torture, first-degree assault, and disorderly conduct. The total sentence could be up to 40 years. You'll die of old age in prison." Bumpy gave a weak smile, his eyes glancing at O'Malley's tense expression. "If I'm finished, why do you look so worried, Captain?" Bumpy asked. "Is it because it's so noisy out there?" O'Malley gritted his teeth. It was indeed very noisy outside. Since early morning, thousands of Harlem residents had marched down downtown Manhattan. They surrounded the criminal courthouse chanting slogans demanding Bumpy's release. "That crowd won't save you," O'Malley whispered menacingly, leaning down. "I just need you to sign this. Admit you orchestrated the kidnapping. I'll get you a reduced sentence of 10 years. A good deal." Bumpy looked at the guilty plea, then at O'Malley. "Do you know why I never sign?" Bumpy said. "Because my signature is very expensive, and you can't afford it. See you in court, Captain." O'Malley roared, about to punch Bumpy in the face when the door burst open. A well-dressed white lawyer carrying a briefcase walked in. That was Abe "Silver" Solomon, New York's best lawyer, hired specifically for this case by Frank Costello.
That's enough, Captain.
Solomon said sharply. "If you lay a finger on my client, I'll sue you for assault, and you'll lose that badge before lunch." O'Malley looked at Solomon, then at Bumpy. He knew his personal business time was over. He stomped out, slamming the door shut. "Goodbye, Captain Solomon," Bumpy nodded. "How's Frank?" "He sends his regards." Solomon sat down, opening his briefcase. "Things are tense, Bumpy. The prosecutor wants to make an example of this. But we have 2 weapons: public opinion and the cowardice of those 3 bastards." Manhattan Criminal Court, 10 o'clock a.m. The atmosphere in the courtroom was stifling and tense, like a taut string about to snap. The courtroom was packed. On one side were the Harlem residents, led by Sarah and Reverend Powell. On the other side were the press police and curious white people. Judge McAllister entered. He was a conservative known for his strictness. He struck his gavel, demanding order. Defendant Ellsworth Johnson. Prosecutor Harrison, a young ambitious man, stood up, pointing at Bumpy. "You stand before the court for your barbaric acts and contempt of law. You have arrogated to yourself the right to be a policeman, a judge, and an executioner. You have kidnapped 3 citizens and tortured them brutally. If we let you off the hook, New York will become a Wild West." Harrison displayed photographs of the 3 robbers' injuries. Slashes on their chests, swollen faces. He tried to paint a picture of Bumpy as a bloodthirsty monster. Bumpy sat silently listening, his face expressionless. It was Solomon's turn to stand. He didn't move around much. He only picked up a single piece of evidence, a plastic bag containing $4.35. "Your Honor," Solomon said, his voice somber. "The prosecutor talks about barbarity, but where does the real barbarity lie? Is it in the man who apprehended the perpetrator, or in the man who stabbed a 15-year-old boy 12 times over this small amount of money?" Solomon turned to the jury. "My client is not an angel. He has a past. But that night he was the only person in this city who cared about justice for Ben Thomas. What did the police do? They drank coffee and told the poor mother to go home. What did Bumpy Johnson do? He did what the police couldn't. He apprehended the perpetrator." "Protest!" Prosecutor Harrison shouted. "The defense attorney is advocating the law of the jungle." "I'm just stating the truth," Solomon retorted sharply. "If the law is blind, then the people must open their eyes." A resounding round of applause erupted from the Harlem audience. Judge McAllister struck the gavel repeatedly. "Silence, silence! If there's any more noise, I'll kick you all out. Lunchtime. Judge's office." Judge McAllister was sitting drinking tea to calm himself when the desk phone rang. It was a private line reserved only for important figures. "McAllister speaking," he answered. "Good morning, Judge." A hoarse, authoritative voice rang out. It was none other than Frank Costello. "I hear the trial is going very well." McAllister broke out in a sweat. "Mr. Costello, I'm working." "I know," Costello said softly. "I just wanted to remind you a little about the law. The law needs evidence, right? To convict someone of kidnapping, you need the victim to testify. I heard. Those 3 young men in the hospital don't want to testify." "What?" "They're scared," Costello chuckled. "They're afraid that if they go to court and point out Bumpy the next time they see Bumpy, it won't be at the police station. They've withdrawn their complaint. Check it out." McAllister was stunned. Without a complaint, the kidnapping charge would be dropped. "Do the right thing, Judge," Costello said before hanging up. "Don't turn a people's hero into a martyr. It's not good for your re-election campaign." 1:30 p.m. Sentencing. The trial resumed. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Prosecutor Harrison stood up aggressively. "I'll call the witness who is the kidnapping victim." But a court clerk rushed forward and whispered something in the prosecutor's ear. Harrison's face changed color. He stammered, looking up at the judge. "Your Honor, the victims, they refused to testify. They signed waivers." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Solomon smiled, winking at Bumpy. Judge McAllister struck the gavel. He looked at Bumpy Johnson, the man sitting there with an unusual air of authority, then out at the enraged crowd outside the window. "Because there are no witnesses and the victims refuse to cooperate." The judge declared, his voice dry. "The court dismisses the charges of kidnapping and intentional infliction of injury." A cheer erupted in the room. Sarah burst into tears. "However," McAllister struck the gavel harder, "the defendant is still guilty of disturbing public order and acting in act of law enforcement. The court sentences the defendant to 6 months of probation and a $500 fine." It was a light slap in the face. A symbolic sentence to save face for the police. Bumpy stood up. He nodded to the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor." Prosecutor Harrison threw the file to the ground and stormed out. Captain O'Malley stood in the corner, his face as red as a ripe persimmon, his hand gripping his baton so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had lost. Lost to Bumpy, lost to the crowd, and lost to the hidden power of Frank Costello. The courthouse steps. 2:00 p.m. The large doors of the courthouse opened. Bumpy Johnson stepped out into the sunlight. "Bumpy, Bumpy, Bumpy." Thousands of Harlem residents cheered his name. They held up signs, "Justice for Ben." Bumpy is a hero. Bumpy didn't smile. He didn't consider this a victory. He walked slowly down the steps. The crowd parted, creating a path for him to Sarah. The grieving mother rushed forward and embraced Bumpy. She wept, soaking his shirt with her tears. "Thank you. Thank you for getting justice for my son." Bumpy patted her back. "That's the least I could do, Sarah. Go home and rest." He pulled a thick envelope from his pocket. It was the funeral money he'd collected from his brothers. "This is for Ben's funeral, and to buy him the nicest scarf." After Sarah left, Bumpy saw Captain O'Malley standing by a nearby lamppost, smoking, glaring at him. Bumpy approached O'Malley. "Captain," Bumpy said. "You won this time, Bumpy," O'Malley spat. "But don't get cocky. I'll be watching you. One slip and I'll be there. You know O'Malley." Bumpy adjusted his collar, looking directly into the officer's eyes. "Next time, if a child is murdered in Harlem, please get there before I do. Don't make me do your work. I'm very busy." Bumpy turned and walked away, climbing into the waiting black Cadillac. Nat Pettigrew closed the car door. The car rolled away, taking the Godfather back to his kingdom. But the story wasn't over. The 3 murderers, though they hadn't testified in court, were still alive. They were in Bellevue Hospital under police guard. In the car, Bumpy turned to Nat. "They think withdrawing the lawsuit is the end of it." "What do you want, boss?" Nat asked. "The court has already ruled on their part," Bumpy said, looking out the car window, his eyes cold. "But my sentence isn't over yet. Blood for blood. They're at Bellevue Hospital 3rd floor. Police guard them 24/7. Nobody can guard forever," Bumpy said. "And hospitals always need nurses and janitors. Make arrangements. I want those 3 to go to hell to apologize to Ben before he's buried." The legal battle was won. But the final purge, the true conclusion of the 48-hour sentence, was just beginning. Bumpy Johnson never did things halfway. Hello. We've come a long and emotional journey filled with drama. This is the conclusion where all grudges are settled, and the legend of the Robin Hood of Harlem is etched into history. This is Part 5, The Final Sentence. Part 5, The Final Sentence, Bellevue Hospital, Manhattan, 3:00 a.m., November 15th, 1947. Bellevue Hospital was notorious for housing the most severe mental illnesses and wounded criminals awaiting trial. The 3rd floor hallway reeked of ether and disinfectant, eerily silent. Only the low hum of the old ventilation fans could be heard. In front of room 304, where the 3 murderers were being treated, the guard on duty, named Henderson, sat dozing. He was tired, bored, and craving a cigarette. He glanced at his watch. 3 hours until the shift change. From the end of the hallway, a figure in a white lab coat and medical mask pushed a drug cart towards him. The wheels squeaked, squeak, on the tiled floor. Henderson stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun holster. "Stop. This isn't the time for injections." The doctor stopped his calm eyes, looking up at Henderson. He wasn't a hospital doctor. He was a black man with cold, piercing eyes, a professional assassin hired by Nat Pettigrew from Philadelphia to ensure no one in New York could identify him. "The chief physician's order," the man said in a low voice, handing him a piece of paper with a red stamp, a sophisticated forgery. "Patient 304 needs a high dose of morphine for pain relief. They're screaming and disturbing the other rooms." Henderson took the paper, pretending to read it. He didn't really care much. He knew the 3 men in there were scum who had killed a child. He also knew Bumpy Johnson had been released. The doctor respectfully handed Henderson a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes. "You can go outside and have a smoke. It'll be quick." Henderson looked at the pack, then at the doctor. He understood. In the New York underworld, sometimes silence was golden. He took the pack and put it in his pocket. "5 minutes," Henderson said, then turned and walked towards the emergency stairwell. The door to room 304 opened. Inside, 3 men lay on hospital beds. The scarred man was in the middle, the other 2 on either side. They were sleeping fitfully, writhing in pain from Bumpy's torture the night before. The noise woke the scarred man. He opened his eyes and saw a tall figure in a white coat in front of him. "Is it time for your medicine?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yes," the doctor said, locking the door behind him. "Medicine for a long journey." The scarred man felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the doctor's hands. Not oral medication. On the tray were 3 syringes filled with a clear liquid. Not morphine. It was a concentrated potassium chloride mixture, something that would stop the heart in 30 seconds, mimicking a natural heart attack. Who are you?" He tried to scream, but the doctor lunged forward, covering his mouth with a cloth soaked in anesthetic. The other 2 were treated similarly in a flash. The professionalism was ruthless. Not a single loud sound, not a drop of blood. The doctor injected the deadly liquid into each man's IV line. Their bodies twitched slightly. Their eyes rolled back, staring blankly at the ceiling. They wanted to struggle to beg, but their bodies were paralyzed. In their final moments, the only image they saw was the cold eyes of the doctor, Bumpy Johnson's messenger. Their hearts beat slower and slower, then stopped completely. The heart monitor beside them emitted a long, monotonous beep, but the work wasn't finished. The doctor pulled something from his lab coat pocket. He gently placed it on the scarred man's chest, right over where his heart had stopped beating. It was a bill, and beside it, neatly arranged, were loose change, $1.45, evenly divided from the original $4.35. The doctor gathered his things and pushed the cart out. The hallway was still deserted. Officer Henderson had just returned, the smell of cigarette smoke still lingering on his coat. "Is it done?" Henderson asked. "They slept soundly," the doctor replied, pushing the cart toward the elevator. "I'll never bother anyone again." The next morning, Sheriff Gallagher's office. The phone rang incessantly. Gallagher picked it up, listening to the report from Bellevue Hospital. His face turned from red to deathly pale. "All 3 dead. All 3, Gallagher yelled. "Heart failure at the same time? Are you kidding me?" He hung up and slumped into his chair. He knew what had happened. The entire police department knew, but the medical examiner reported no signs of external force. Potassium chloride dissolves quickly in blood, leaving the scene of a natural death by traumatic shock. The office door opened. Captain O'Malley entered, carrying a new envelope of evidence sent from the hospital. "Boss, you need to see this," O'Malley said, his voice trembling. He emptied the blood-stained coins from the envelope onto the table. "They found this on their chests. Bumpy Johnson returned the change." Gallagher looked at the pile of loose change. He felt a chill. This wasn't just a murder. This was a declaration of sovereignty. Bumpy Johnson was telling the entire legal system, "You can't protect your witnesses. You can't stop me. In Harlem, I am God." "Close the file," Gallagher said wearily, waving his hand. "Record the cause of death as post-traumatic complications. I don't want to hear anything more about this. If we investigate further, the people will protest again. Let it die down." Harlem Cemetery, noon November 15th. The rain had stopped, but gray clouds still covered the sky. Thousands had come to pay their respects to Ben Thomas. Never before had Harlem witnessed such a large funeral. Not only people of color, but also progressive white people, journalists, and famous jazz musicians were present. Ben lay in a simple but dignified oak coffin covered with white lilies. Sarah stood before the grave dressed in a worn but clean black dress. Around her neck was a beautiful blue scarf, the last gift from Bumpy on Ben's behalf. She wept, but these were tears of liberation. She knew her son had been avenged. The wicked had paid the price. Pastor Powell read the eulogy. His voice echoed in the silent space. Today we bury a son of Harlem, a boy with a heart of gold and working hands. Ben's passing is painful, but it is also a wake-up call. It reminds us that in the darkness of injustice, we must light our own torch. Bumpy Johnson did not stand with the crowd. He stood on a small hill in the distance under the bare branches of an old oak tree. He wore a black overcoat, sunglasses, and held an unlit cigarette. Nat Pettigrew stood behind him, holding a black umbrella to shield the boss. "They're gone, boss," Nat reported softly. "The police have closed the case. The press is calling the deaths of those three karma." Bumpy nodded slightly. He looked down at the stream of people throwing handfuls of earth into Ben's grave. "Do you believe in heaven, Nat?" Bumpy asked suddenly. "I don't know, boss. I just hope there's a better place than this Harlem," Nat replied honestly. "Ben is there," Bumpy said, his voice somber. "He's an angel, and we are the gatekeepers of hell. We have to get our hands dirty so that people like Ben can be clean." He lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag. The smoke rose, mingling with the cold mist. From the cemetery below, Sarah looked up at the hill. She saw Bumpy's solitary figure. She bowed slightly. Not a bow for a crime boss, but for a protector. Bumpy lightly touched the brim of his hat in return. He turned and walked away. The black Cadillac was waiting at the cemetery gate. "Where are we going, boss?" Nat asked as he opened the car door. "To the Red Rooster," Bumpy said, his eyes regaining their usual sharpness. "Life goes on. The casinos need to reopen, and I hear Lucky Luciano wants to renegotiate the price of the liquor. We have a lot of work to do." The car rolled away, leaving behind the newly dug grave. The Ben Thomas case was closed after 48 horrific hours. But the legend of Bumpy Johnson, the man who brought both the legal system and the underworld to their knees before the death of a shoeshine boy, will be told in the barbershops, bars, and alleyways of Harlem for decades to come. It is the story of an era where justice was not written in law books, but in the courage and fiery blood of people who refused to bow down.